Good day. So we are on day 5 of 365 of our Bible reading. And today's reading is from Genesis chapter 16 to 18. And I'll be giving a few lessons from some of the verses that stood out for me as we were reading. And before I do that, I'll also give a quick summary of chapter 16 to 18. With Genesis chapter 16, we see Sarai unable to conceive, and she gives a servant Hagar to Abraham, and this is where she's taking matters in her own hands, and we see the birth of Ishmael. And then we see in chapter 17 God reaffirming his covenant with Abraham. So this is something which this covenant began in chapter 12 when God called Abraham. We see it in chapter 15 as well. And now we're seeing this affirmation of God emphasizing that this covenant is something that he will keep his part. So it's just amazing how God reaffirms. He doesn't say something just once, but he confirms his word. So God is confirming his covenant with Abraham. And in this point, we see a change of name. So from Abram to Abraham. And we also see the changing of Sarai's name from Sarai to Sarah. And it is in this chapter that the circumcision as the sign of the covenant is established. And they're told that, Abraham is told that he needs to circumcise every boy from when they are 8 days old. And God promises to still give Abraham and Sarah her own son. And this is where Isaac is going to come from. In Genesis 18, we see 3 visitors, and one of the visitors, it is said that it is the Lord. They are visiting Abraham at this point in time, so not Abraham anymore. They're visiting Abraham, and they are reaffirming the promise of Isaac. So this thing of God, he continues to affirm, he continues to speak. He continues to say the same word. And you begin to see a pattern as you go through the scriptures, as you go through both the Old and New Testament, that it is often the same thing being said over and over again. When you think of the prophets typically come with the same message. They are affirming, they are repeating. So God seems to always have this repeating words to speak to his people, right? And the New Testament is the same. I mean, think of the first 4 books, which is the gospel. They have, in a same sense, speaking about the story of Jesus coming in different angles. And then you move on to the epistles. And most of the epistles, you find that they have something similar. They are speaking of the great cross, the gospel message, and also, this new covenant established, pointing people to salvation by grace alone through faith. And then they are also being told to then work hard and live out these lives as new believers. So the Bible is full of repetition, and here we can see an example of that, how we are seeing God has been saying the same word to Abraham from chapter 12 of Genesis, and this is continuing. And even here in chapter 18, we see how one of the visitors that are coming to Abraham's house or tent is said to be the Lord, and they once again reaffirm that there will be a son to be born to Abraham, and we see Sarah laughing about it because they're old, they're in their old age, and they do not expect themselves to can have a child at this point in time. All right, so that's the summary of these 3 chapters that we have read in day 5 of 365. And so what we'll do now is I'll just turn to a few lessons based on some of the verses that I've highlighted that stood out for me. All right, so starting first in chapter 16, with verse 4, it says, "And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress." Right, so this is this story of Sarai and Hagar, where, as we've read, Hagar is going to give birth to Abraham's son Ishmael, because Sarai saw that, hang on, I cannot have children, so maybe for this promise of God to be fulfilled, let us have Hagar. But Hagar is a symbol, and we learn about this even in the New Testament. She's a symbol of taking matters in your own hands. Where God has said a word that He will do it, He will give you what He has promised to give you, and then we take matters in our own hands. Yes, so we're seeing Abraham and Sarai. They are taking the promise of God and they're trying to help God, and we cannot help God, for God is God, right? So they take matters in their own hands, and we see that she conceived. Hagar conceived. Now the verse I've highlighted in verse 4, which says that when she saw she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. So this is about, now that you have received something amazing. And when you look into the context, this is the context of this story. Here is Abraham, who few chapters back, in fact, the previous chapter, we saw how he was worried in terms of who's going to be his heir, who's going to inherit all of this wealth that he has. He does not have his own son. He does not have his own flesh and blood. So Abraham is a rich prince. He's like a prince. Is this man who has gathered so much wealth. Remember, a few chapters back, he had to separate with his nephew Lot. He's so wealthy, meaning he's like a prince, right? And he's the head of his household. And here's a woman who has now conceived a child for this man. So it means that she has something amazing. She has a great gift. She has something that even her own master Sarai does not have. And then the Bible says that she looks with contempt. So here's the question: when you receive something great, when you receive a gift, when you receive a promotion at work, when you receive a job, when you receive something good, when good things happen to you, how do you treat other people who are still waiting perhaps for their blessing? How do you treat other people who have not yet come to receive that which you now have? Do you look at people with contempt? Here we see Hagar looks at Sarah with contempt. Why? Because she now has something. It's like, I have, you don't have. So this verse really can remind us of how we ought to treat one another when you have different blessings from God, or when you stumble upon gifts and riches and so on. When you're getting ahead in life, how do you treat other people? Okay, so we know what happened. Sarai was not happy with this, so she had to be chased out of the home. Now, verse 7 I've highlighted. It says, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. So I highlighted this verse to indicate that, in fact, I'm going to speak more on it as well, but to indicate that the Lord is the one who found her. And I've been mentioning this theme, attempting to connect it also with the theme of the gospel, that it is God who finds us first. So here she is, she's in the wilderness, she's been chased out, and the angel of the Lord found her. So she did not find the angel of the Lord, she was the one found. So it's as if there's this care that we see. In fact, we're going to read more on it now, but there's this care we see from God where he looks out. In fact, let's read verse 11, which I've highlighted as well. It says, and the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. Now, this is what I want to say. We don't hear this verse saying that because the Lord has listened to your prayer, because the Lord has listened to your fasting and prayer, because the Lord has listened to that you went to the mountain and prayed and cried to God in prayer. Actually, she was not, it doesn't seem to us that she was speaking to God here. She was just on her way, perhaps back to her home country, and it says that the Lord listened to her affliction. So I want to speak about the Lord here, because as we read the word of God, we should always reflect on the nature of God. We can see something about who this God is. And he's a God who listens to afflictions. He listens to the cry of people even before they pray to him. God can listen to the affliction. So when people are being afflicted, especially as a people group, when nations are being afflicted, God is not blind. God can see. He's not deaf. God can hear. God can listen to affliction, and he can see the affliction. And we're going to speak about this again when we look into Leah, the first wife of Jacob, when she gives birth to these 4 sons, and how she named their names based on what the Lord is seeing, the fact that she's not loved because Jacob loved Rachel. So I want to say, God sees and listens to afflictions. God can respond. God can intervene in situations where he's seeing people crying out. The cry out of people can reach up to God. In fact, we're going to see this in the next chapter when there's a cry out in Sodom, which reaches God. The cry out of people can reach God. When people are crying from the depths of their heart, it can reach God. What an amazing God who pays attention to the affliction of people. And this can really show us the heart of God. So that is verse 11. But I skipped verse 9, which I also highlighted, which says that the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. And again, I just have this picture of people being called back home. Come back home and submit to the Lord. There's a sense of, why are you in the wilderness? In the wilderness, there's no life in the wilderness. Return home. Come back home and submit. So there's a sense of returning, but not just returning, submission as well. And there's a call to Hagar to say that she should not just return, but she should return and submit. All right, so in verse 13, it says that she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are a God of seeing. For she said, truly, here I have seen him who looks after me. Imagine, she even had this amazing opportunity to give a name to the Lord who spoke to her, to call him by a name. And this Lord can be called by name even by a Hagar who's not part of the heritage or the covenant. What an amazing God. He's so accessible. This Hagar who has been chased out is not part of the heritage of God's covenant. She's not part of the covenant, because the one who's part of the covenant is Sarah. And yet we're seeing God. He sees her affliction. He goes after her. She's on the outside, and yet God goes after her. This reminds me of us as well, that we are the foreigners. We can be Gentiles. Most of us listening to this might be Gentiles. We're not direct descendants of Abraham. We're not direct descendants of the tribes of Israel. We're not Israelites. We're not Jews. And yet God sees our affliction. And yet God cares. I mean, look at her. She's calling the name of God. She's naming this God. This God cared to look at her affliction, even though she's not even part of God's heritage or covenant, right? Because the covenant is now between Abraham and Sarah. And God also, we can say that God cares about children. My last point in this chapter. God cares about children. God did not see it fit that this young baby should be born in the wilderness, out there without the presence of his father. that actually this Ishmael should be raised by his father. God cares. God cares for children. That children should be found in homes. That children should be raised within the presence of their fathers. And where are the fathers today? This is also just an encouragement to say, fathers, may we carry the heart of God as well and be present fathers. Look after our children. God cares for children. Now let's move to the next chapter. So in chapter 17, I highlight verse 1 because the previous verse ends off showing us the 86 years when Ishmael was born. But verse 1 says, when Abraham was 99 years old. And this just goes to show that, the things of God sometimes can take time. I mean, this difference is almost 15 years. It's as if there was like a period of silence between chapter 16 and chapter 17. And now we see God speaking again, appearing to the Lord, appearing to Abraham to speak to him. And he says, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. So this is once again, this confirmation or reaffirmation of the covenant, and there's a call for Abraham to walk before the Lord blameless. So I highlight this mainly to indicate the years which have passed, which shows that there's a patient process when we're dealing with God. He spoke 15 years ago that Abraham, you'll have your own child with Sarah. You'll have your own child. And now, 15 years later, it is this young man, Ishmael, has grown now. He's almost a young man. And this goes to show that the things of God can take time. Sometimes people want God to act in 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. And sometimes he will act in 40 years. And when we read the Hall of Fame in Hebrews chapter 11, we see how some of these people never received the promises, but yet they received it from a distance. They acknowledged that they're just passing by in this earth. The things of God can take time. Just want to say that to someone. The things of God can take time. All right, so verse 13, I highlight, which says, both he who is born in your house and he who is bought with your money shall surely be circumcised. So shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. So this is where God is giving this covenant with Abraham, and the sign of the covenant is circumcision. Now the reason I highlight verse 13 is in fact, I also highlight verse 23 for that matter, which says, then Abraham took Ishmael his son and all those born in his household or bought with his money. So Abraham obeyed God here. Every male among the men of Abraham's house, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskin that very day. Watch that very day. And God said to him, as God said to him. So this thing happened that very day. So we can see the fact that Abraham obeyed immediately. Obedience should happen immediately. Don't say, God, I will do it, and you do it after 1 week or after 1 year. Obey today. Obey today. When God says, don't do this sin, stop it today. Don't say, God, hey, I can't, I'm still struggling. Let me just finish it up for the next 6 years. Obey God today. If you need to leave someone, if you need to break off a certain relationship, if you need to do something, do it today. If you fear God, you're going to obey today. But the reason why I highlight these verses, verse 23, and as well as verse 13, is to show that God, once again, this whole idea of God is showing this picture of bringing in the outsiders, the Gentiles, like us, who are not direct descendants of the Jews, right? Why do I say that? It says that remember that circumcision was a big deal, and this circumcision is happening. It's happening to be a sign of the covenant, and yet even the servants, even those who are bought with the money, should be circumcised. And I find that amazing because these are not Abraham's blood family, right? In fact, the very first people to be circumcised, it's not even Isaac, because Isaac was not yet born yet. So it's not even Isaac who's being circumcised first. It is people who don't even continue in this tree of God, in this tree of God called Israel. It is Gentiles bought with your money shall be circumcised. So this goes to show that from the very beginning, God was inclusive. Yes, he chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but yet he was inclusive. And we see it even in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, as mentioned even in the book of Matthew, how it includes all of these Gentile mothers. Think of Rahab, the prostitute. So God has been inclusive. Think of Ruth, also a Moabite. So God has been inclusive. Bought with your money, and yet they're to be also circumcised. God doesn't say, okay, no, ignore the ones who are bought with your money, only circumcise your children. But actually, not just Ishmael, who is not the son of the promise, also those who are bought with money. So that's verse 13 and verse 23, bringing it together. But the other point is he did it that very day. It was an immediate obedience. How is the nature of our obedience? Okay, so two more verses in this chapter. So verse in chapter 17, that is verse 15. Verse 15 says, and God said to Abraham, as for your wife, as for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. So here's Isaac being promised, and we're going to see how Abraham laughs about it. So in this chapter, Abraham laughs about it, and in the next chapter, Sarah laughs about it because they are old, right? I will bless her, and she shall become nations. She shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. Here's what I want to mention in this verse, and why I highlighted verse 15 and 16. It is the fact that not only was Abraham renamed from Abram to Abraham, so too was Sarah. So too was a blessing spoken over Sarah. And this once again shows me the inclusive nature of God. Male and female created he them, both in his image. So this thing was not just like patriarchy where it's just pointing to Abraham alone. It speaks of how even with Sarah, I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. So I will bless her, she shall become. It says she shall become nations. She shall become kings of peoples, and kings of peoples shall come from her. So there's a blessing that is spoken over Sarah. And I just love to see the inclusive nature of God. We are learning about the nature of God. God is inclusive. God is a God who sees when people are in pain. He hears the cries and afflictions even before they pray. Verse 18, the last verse here, it says, and Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Remember that Abraham laughs about it. He's not quite sure that, but I'm old. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Oh, that the plans I did myself. Oh, that the works of my hands may live before you. Oh, that the things that we took matters in our own hands. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. But God said, no. Sarah your wife shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. So here we are seeing that God is not interested in an Ishmael. He's not yes, he cared about Ishmael. He brought Hagar back. He cared about Ishmael. In fact, there was a blessing spoken there, but God still says that not the works of your hands. I care about the works of my hands. It's going to be the work of God, because yes, Sarah is old, but you shall give birth. It's going to be a work of God, because our works are what? Our works are just filthy rags before God. What can we do? What can we bring before God? Only that which God is doing can we bring before God. Only that which God is doing in our lives can we bring before God. All right, let's move to chapter 18. So I highlight verse 6. As we read the story, we see the three men who become visitors at Abraham's tent or house. And one of them is said to be the Lord. And verse 6 says that Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, quick, 3 sets of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the head and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the young man who prepared it quickly. I just want you to underline the words which look like speed. Number 1, it says Abraham went quickly. Number 2, he said quick. He tells Sarah to do this quick. In verse 7, Abraham ran. He did not walk, he ran. And he gave it to the young man who prepared it quickly. So 4 times we see words which have to do with speed. And I highlighted this, remembering also what we read earlier, that he circumcised that very same day, that his obedience was quick. And here Abraham moves quickly to serve these visitors. He's not doing it hastily. He's not doing it slowly. He's doing it quickly. Yeah, this is a fear of God. When you have fear of God, you move quick. You don't obey God slowly. You obey God quickly. Okay, let me move. Verse 14, I highlight. Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I'll return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. So the simple point here is to highlight that nothing is too hard for God. Nothing is too hard for God. With God, everything is possible. Right? Nothing is too hard for God. And this goes to show that this is a work of God, not a work of man. All right, the last few verses. So this is where Abraham is going to intercede, and he's praying about Sodom, to say that what if there are 50 righteous people, verse 26. It's a very fascinating prayer, which, number 1, it goes to show the nature of prayer being relaxed. I mean, imagine this guy is speaking to the Lord by saying, okay, pardon me, okay, maybe what if it's 45, what if it's 40, what if it's 30, what if it's 10, like he's having this. So I just love to observe the nature of this prayer, just being simple, right? So I love that part, the simplicity of prayer, where it's just an honest conversation. But number 2, what I want to highlight as we close is the idea that he's moving from 50 righteous people. Verse 26, and the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous people, I'll spare the whole place for their sake. Verse 28, he says, suppose there are 45. And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. So he goes down and down. Verse 32, then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he answered, for the sake of the 10, I will not destroy it. And this goes to show once again the nature of God. God is a God of justice. And typically the scholars and theologians and Bible teachers would say that even if Abraham went down to one more person, the answer would have been the same. For the sake of one, I will not destroy it. This is an amazing nature of God, where he has justice, right? This justice. And in the justice of God, he does bring punishment. Sometimes it could be that he would rather remove the one who is righteous and punish the rest. He's a God of justice. So this is just an amazing thing to observe, one, in terms of the nature of prayer, how it's just a very interesting, simple prayer where he's having this conversation and, don't be angry, let me speak again. There's a sense of just a down-to-earth and simplicity in prayer as he's interceding for this place. But secondly, and most importantly, the idea that God is a God of justice. For the sake of the 10, he won't destroy. For the sake of the one, he will not destroy. And indeed, God is a God of both justice and mercy. Judgment he will bring, but he will show mercy. God is a God of perfect justice. He saves even those who are righteous. And this is what we can learn from today's lesson as we look into Genesis chapter 16 to chapter 18 of our day 5. Amen. God bless you.